Welcome to The Pipeline, Western Standard's weekly current affairs show. I'm publisher Derek Fildebrandt. This is Dave Naylor, our news editor, and Cory Morgan, our digital editor and rage columnist extraordinaire. Thank you for joining us today, Wednesday, October 7th, from our offices in downtown Calgary, Alberta. Today we're going to be going through a number of very hot topics right now. The Alberta to Alaska Railway under potential threat from Justin Trudeau. The Alberta Federation of Labor's union boss, Gil McGowan, has launched a boycott against businesses that have supported the Tories. The Saskatchewan election, a whole hodgepodge, nothing really happening there, just a lot of controversy, but not much actually happening on the policy front. And British Columbia, a little bit happening on the policy front, but again, a pretty static election. And we're going to talk about all four of those issues today. Before we get started, if you're not already a member of the Western Standard, please go to westernstandardonline.com right now and go to membership and consider becoming a member. The Western Standard does not take a dime of taxpayer subsidies from the government. We are one of the very, very few truly independent media organizations in Canada. We closed out September with 600,000 readers, making us third largest, most well-read news organization in Western Canada, in large thanks to all our contributors and led by our news editor, Dave Naylor. So if you want to support that, become a member right now for just a few bucks a month. You can ensure that we have an independent and subsidy-free media here in Western Canada. But let's get it started. We're gonna, I think, first turn to the Alberta to Alaska to Alberta Railway. Maybe a bit of background and what's happening right now, Dave.
Derek, this is a project that's been in the works for years, a very long time. It's a $22 billion rail track from Alaska, from Anchorage, down through to probably Edmonton, the Edmonton area. And it would be used to get Canadian resources to Tidewater. Obviously great news for the West, but Justin Trudeau on the weekend said, okay, let's not get overexcited. Before anybody buys any rail track, don't forget it's got to go through rigorous environmental assessment. That is what everybody knows now as Bill C-69. Some people say there'll never be another massive project built in the country again because of it. And if this is the case, I think, Cory, it's another slap in the face to the West.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we were getting pretty excited about that. I mean, this was a new potential export to the ports, to the coast. It bypassed British Columbia, which I think was very purposeful because we've had a lot of issues with them. It would be great for all sorts of products, though, whether lumber, potash, even if we'd upgraded and manufactured things. And, of course, that big hot button, I think, which brought about Trudeau's resistance is bitumen and oil. And the language Trudeau used was distressing because it was along those lines of basically saying, don't put your dollars in now on something that we might not approve. He's already warning investors that because this thing needs a large chunk of private money. Now, anybody who is starting to open their wallet after hearing the Prime Minister saying that, after seeing what they've done to pipelines in Canada and other things, he already killed it in my view. There's got to be some positive language saying it's going to go ahead coming from Ottawa. Or nobody's going to invest in this thing. I mean, why would you? You might as well buy lotto tickets. You don't know where Trudeau's going to land. Well, we got an idea where he's landing. He didn't sound very positive on this. So why they oppose it is difficult. I mean, you know, it does start to feed that. Like, do you guys really just fear any form of Western independence from centralized control? It's infuriating, and they seem to have killed this right dead in the water.
I mean, his language wasn't strong, to be fair, but it was, so the context of the question was, well, this, runs through areas that have First Nations around them and whatnot, as any kind of infrastructure project running through remote areas is inevitably going to do. But, he seemed to be trying to assure his base that, don't worry, this isn't a done deal. We've got this C-69 process in place, and that's, so it was kind of two-sided. He was trying to reassure his base that this isn't necessarily going ahead. We've got this process I put in place, wink, wink, and we all know what it's really meant to do. And it was And it was a warning to potential investors not to put too much money into this thing before it really gets off the ground. I mean, we could read this as, we have to be careful what we read into Trudeau. I mean, how much is he actually really trying to subtly and carefully message things, and how much is him just being a moron and not understanding?
It's always that possibility.
So it's difficult to tell with him. But I would take it as a big warning shot that this is not necessarily going forward, that this is still very much up in the air. This is a railway that's been in consideration for about 50 or 60 years. The better part of since World War II, this has been considered, because it's obviously a major missing artery in North America's transport and trade infrastructure, and it's been considered uneconomical until now because pipelines are just impossible to build, and for political reasons they need ways to get oil from Alberta to international markets. Rail, despite being much less environmentally friendly than pipelines, is for some reason more politically palatable, for reasons we all can speculate on. But because of that, because pipelines are taboo to too many people politically now, and because we can't get anything through BC or through Eastern Canada, this is now an option. And the federal government throwing cold water on it, I hope it's not a deliberate thing. I hope this is just Trudeau not being particularly intelligent with his remarks, but I fear that it's not.
I hope that's the case. But and the other thing with the rail, as opposed to pipelines, it can do a lot of things. It could bring things into Canada. That's the aspect that I think is really exciting as well. We could get manufactured goods, products, cars, you name it, coming in and then distributing from a central North American location.
Well, I'm not sure that's necessarily needed. I mean, what are we going to bring from Alaska? I imagine it's going to be a lot heavier going to Alaska than back. We already have the Port of Vancouver. I mean, like we know what is the smart way to trade, and that is directly from Alberta through BC, Port of Vancouver, Surrey, these areas. We just can't do it for political reasons.
Our smart ways are getting stopped, so this is a bypass,
Yeah.
and even though it might be a little more expensive. But I mean, having multiple paths can also keep the one port a little more honest, perhaps.
That's entirely possible because we know that we don't want, if it's completely empty coming back, then trade routes are going to find a way to, they'll probably get it at discounted rates. But I don't think this is going to be a major. Actually, it could end up, funny enough, being at least a little bit of a competitor for the Port of Vancouver to bypass it. Hey, I mean, if Alberta all of a sudden couldn't go through BC for some unforeseen reason, I mean, having a railway through Alaska could help.
Certainly could.
Okay, well, bring it a little closer to home. There's a big. Was it just yesterday that this took place? Or the day before?
Day before.
Day before. So 2 days ago, we had Alberta Federation of Labor union boss Gil McGowan start a campaign to boycott businesses in Alberta that have given to the UCP or to UCP affiliated / fronted third-party advertisers or political action committees, saying that Albertans shouldn't shop at these businesses. How much of an effect it's going to have, I don't really know. Boycotts tend to be flashes in the pan. On the left and the right, they tend to be a flash in the pan. Everybody gets over it. I got pissed off at Tim Hortons. That lasted a couple of months, and I was like, I really want my coffee. So I went back. I got over it. But either way, this has turned out to be a wildly controversial move. Premier Rachel Notley has refused repeatedly to condemn it, more or less just saying, well, there's consequences to your actions. Dave, do you want to fill us in on what the reaction has been, how the NDP have been handling it, and how the AFL and Gil McGowan have responded to the backlash they've received?
Well, as you mentioned, NDP leader Rachel Notley was asked twice about it yesterday. She dodged the question. Jason Kenney, obviously the UCP people are strongly opposed to this. It covers all sorts of businesses who have donated from $500 to tens of thousands of dollars, and Gil McGowan says, tough. In fairness, this is publicly accessed material. Anybody can go online and find out who has donated to what political party. But this Boycott UCP donors website is very specific. You click on an icon and it shows you the name of the business and how much they've donated. So certainly drawn a lot of anger on the right-wing side of Alberta. And as you said, how much damage it'll do, nobody knows.
Cory, as Dave said, this is already publicly available information. I received an email from one of our members this morning in response to the newsletter where this was the main featured story. And he said, well, where can I find a list of who's donated to the NDP or NDP-affiliated third-party advertisers, political action committees? I said, we don't have anything posted ourselves. We're not going tit for tat with the AFL here. We're not partisan here, but I sent him a link to Elections Alberta's website where you can find all this. So this is all publicly available information already. So I don't think it'd be fair to call it doxing, but it certainly is something. Do you think this is, regardless of how we might feel about the AFL and its pseudo-Marxist policies, regardless of how we feel politically, do you think this is fair game?
I mean, it's fair game as far as legality goes. I mean, there's nothing much to be done for it, but we can call them out. And what I see this is a form of intimidation and thuggery, which is of course, the basis of a lot of organized labor. And Gil McGowan's always been unashamed about supporting things like that. We saw that with the co-op strike and his views on it and things such as that. I mean, it's highlighting these businesses for shame and potential abuse, and we're in a charged environment. I would hope that you don't see a brick going through a business's window or something else. As he's shown too, a picture of Gil quite tightly with Rachel Notley. If you remember the last election, I actually put a complaint into the chief electoral officer for collusion, because the scene's really been changed. The unions and businesses can't donate directly to parties any longer. Mm-hmm. So of course, what happened? PACs formed all over the place because people still want to find ways to support their parties, and their businesses want to find ways to support them, and unions want to find ways to support them. And the AFL is essentially a PAC. It's not a union, but it represents labor groups. But the AFL, the NDP, is very unique in a lot of ways. In their constitution, it's mandated. They have to have seats on their board for the AFL and all of the AFL affiliates, which are dozens. So the AFL actually wags the NDP dog in a big way, and that's why Notley's very reticent. Where I think this is backfiring on Gil. I think Albertans are annoyed with this. It's a hard economy, whatever the motivation might be. We don't want to see anybody targeting businesses that are struggling and workers who are working at them. But Notley won't disassociate from it either, because she's actually tied at the hip with the AFL. It's a branch of the NDP, technically.
Well, yeah. So this goes back to I think the 1960s or the early 1970s, when the old CCF, Canadian Commonwealth Federation, merged with the Canadian Labour Congress. It across Canada built these labor federations formally into the NDP constitutions in every single province where they exist. This would be comparable to Suncor having automatic seats on the UCP board. Yeah. Like, okay, well, here's the Suncor seat, and here's the Imperial seat, and people would have something to say about that. I mean, you could be pro-labor without having organized labor formally embedded into the governing structure of your party. You could be pro-business without having big corporations with automatic seats granted onto your party. It's quite bizarre stuff. Gil's been a federal NDP candidate before. He's openly campaigned for Rachel Notley before. So, they're not some nonpartisan union. These are explicitly political, explicitly partisan. And McGowan is, I think, a departure even from most of the provinces left. He is a bit, not just more extreme in policy, but he takes anyone who disagrees with him as a objectively evil person. So like the language that was used here, in his response to a lot of the backlash, has been that these businesses are just trying to destroy the lives of working people in Alberta. They're trying to get these people fired and whatnot. And it is possible to disagree with someone politically and not believe that they just want the wanton ruin and destruction of the place. They just have different political views. Most people who support the NDP, I think, are obviously a bit out there, but they have a worldview, and they, other than some people who might just have a naked self-interest. Some businesses donate for naked self-interest. We know that happens. It's happened a lot before, especially in the previous Tory government. Happens still today. And unions and whatnot support because they have a naked self-interest and, whetting the appetite of the government of the day to give them a better union contract. But most people who support political parties don't have a direct financial stake in it. They are supporting it because they share their values and want them to do something that they think is make the world a better place. McGowan, by contrast, believes that anyone who supports a party to the right of Mao is just hell-bent on the destruction of all that is good.
He's a polarizing character. So yeah, I just an ugly scene. I got a feeling it's going to backfire. It seems to be backfiring. The people aren't responding to this well, but they brought it on themselves. Just I want to quickly hit too. Is people are we are live and they're offering some questions. And so back to the rail quickly though. With somebody Stacey Leanne Ellertson saying, other than separation, though, what can a province do to protect itself from government controls or reject them? And that's a big question, of course, which applies to a lot of things. And, to be honest, it's not a heck of a lot.
Well, you could fight in the courts, but the courts in Canada more often than not side with federal control over things, indirect federal control. I mean, they won't allow, say on healthcare, they won't allow the federal government to directly administer a hospital, but they will allow the federal government to dictate provincial policies via the carrot and stick of health transfers. So our Supreme Court has a very long tradition going back over 100 years of more often than not siding with federal control. So you can fight in the courts on these issues. You can, like happens regularly, you can write an angry missive to the Prime Minister and publish that and try to get people worked up. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot we can much do as long as there is a government in Ottawa that has the support, the confidence of the House. You have effectively now, and increasingly, we should maybe talk about this next week, the increasing formalization of the federal Liberal and NDP coalition that is really coming together as a solid governing coalition. The NDP and Liberals voted together to shut down the WE investigation.
Oh, it's Deputy Prime Minister Singh.
Yeah. So, when you've got a government in Ottawa that wants to do that, there's not terribly much you can do if you're still here.
One last thing on the AFL ban. One of the things that's backfiring, and I think Cory's right, it is the timing of it. Alberta businesses are struggling with this COVID pandemic, and to go out and deliberately try and take money away from struggling businesses is just not going to, as Jason Kenney says, it's un-Albertan.
Yeah, I mean, people are free to boycott businesses that do things that they disagree with. There are consequences to actions, and if I know that a business is supporting the NDP, I don't support the NDP or the Tories, but I particularly don't support the NDP. And if a business is supporting the NDP, I might be less likely to shop there. So, I mean, I'm trying to be fair about it. If you support a political party, people have, I think it is fair. I think it's just more the tone of this that they're saying that these businesses are trying to destroy your lives. These are evil businesses and evil people with them, and so you should punish them. But political boycotts are a long and I think fair tradition in most cases. I think it's just more the tone that they've gone about saying, instead of, well, these businesses supported the Tories. If you don't support the Tories, then you shouldn't shop there. I think that actually would be fair, however unkindly it might be. But to say that these are evil people, these are evil businesses trying to bring you down and destroy your lives, I think that's where they go a bit far. Well, let's turn to Saskatchewan. I hadn't heard this before. I'm not sure if the public had heard it before, but Premier Scott Moe, fighting for re-election here, apologizing for a car accident that resulted in someone dying roughly 2.5 decades ago. Dave, why don't you fill us in on
Sure.
that?
It came as a shock to me too, Derek. 23 years ago, he was driving to his parents' farm on a gravel road when Scott Moe ran a stop sign, hit a car containing a family, and killed the woman inside the car. Yesterday, a gentleman called Steve-O Balag posted on his Facebook site that he had just learned that Scott Moe had killed his mother. And he went on a tirade about how Scott Moe had ruined his life and he would hate Scott Moe forever. Premier Moe did talk about this apparently in 2017, when he was running for the leadership of the Saskatchewan Party. But certainly anybody I've ever talked to had never heard of this before. He apologized at a campaign event yesterday, said he regrets it, he's had to live with it every day of his life, and it's part of what, dealing with it has become part of what he's become as a man. But some shocking news, Cory.
So, before we go to Cory, I'm trying to get a better idea. Do we know if this was public knowledge when he was running for the Saskatchewan Party leadership, or was this just simply disclosed in his interview process with the party's hierarchy?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer.
Because I hadn't heard this. I feel like it would have come up. I guess it could be new news that now the guy whose mother had been killed has found out. It is a long time ago.
23 years.
Yeah, it was an accident, but we're still responsible in many cases. But he was not criminally responsible. He got a ticket. It is pretty shocking news. I don't think it. Do you think this is going to have much of an impact on the campaign?
I don't think it will. It did sidetrack. It certainly opened a raw wound for that young gentleman who'd lost his mother. The thing with Moe, the reason he didn't get a large conviction or do time, I imagine, is that of course he didn't find any malintent. It was truly an accident. He got tickets, which meant there was some bad driving and negligence on his part, but not grossly so. He wasn't going 100 miles an hour. He wasn't drunk, of course, or things such.
He
as
did have
that.
a DUI at a different time.
That's a separate thing, yeah. which brings it a little more into question, actually.
Yeah, 1992 he was done for impaired driving.
Yeah.
But I think for most people, they look at it that this is a tragedy. This is a man who feels genuinely bad about it, I believe, and it's just kind of, it's in the past. It's not been a pattern of these things. He certainly didn't set out to harm anybody. It's one of those things, enough of us perhaps at times had rolled a stop sign or ran through a yellow too quickly, where you're taking that chance that 1 in a million tragic accident can happen, and it's just
you're driving through he was on a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. Any one of us who have driven around below Alberta on a regular basis, you're on a gravel road. You generally do a rolling stop. If you're a traffic cop listening, for legal purposes, I'm lying.
You should do it,
but I'm lying if you're a cop listening. But if you're in the middle of nowhere, you generally you can do a safe rolling stop. But sometimes you don't. I don't know the time of day this happened. It's something that happens. My aunt nearly died driving from Saskatchewan to Calgary. I think kind of south of Drumheller towards the Hazard Standard area. It was kind of a similar situation. This happens especially when you're on the prairies. You get almost I don't know what the term is. You get a kind of psychosis of the road. Like, you just kind of, everything blends together. You've been driving in a straight line for a day, and a lot of accidents happen in places where you can see for 15 kilometers in every direction, and people still hit each other like this. It does happen. His apology seemed genuine. It's a long time ago. Some people might hold it against him. I certainly don't blame the son for holding it against Moe, but I think most reasonable people would accept it as a genuine apology.
The tragic thing, Derek, is accidents do happen.
Yeah.
I guess just take it as a lesson to remind all of ourselves these things can happen. So take care on those roads. Slow down at those.
That being said, if one of his candidates had been found with this, there's a good chance he would dump him.
Well,
but whoever said politics was fair.
Yeah.
So let's move on to controversy on the other side of the aisle. An NDP candidate in Saskatchewan. I'm not sure, Dave, maybe you'll fill us in, but an NDP candidate said that the oil sands are effing awful. I'm not sure. Let me give us some context of when she said this. Certainly the remarks just came out now to light, but maybe give us a little background of what happened.
Sure. The media found a 2-year-old Facebook post by a candidate named Mira Conway, NDP candidate, and the Facebook post basically said, well, it did say, the oil sands are an effing disaster, they're effing awful, and she also posted her opposition to the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. Obviously, the party leader Ryan Millay fired back that the NDP as a whole supports pipelines, and that Conway supports the party policy. Conway said it was just the Saskatchewan party trying to stir up some dirt. But yeah, it's people in Alberta aren't happy with it again, because they're dissing what drives our economy.
Yeah, well, and that drives a big part of the Saskatchewan economy too. I mean, Northwest Saskatchewan is oil sands, heavy oil country. It's a resource-based province as well, and again, I just think it's just an NDP candidate who slipped through with what most of them is their true colors. They are anti-energy. They are anti-conventional development. They've got that ideology. It's not going to help her party's fortunes in that province because Saskatchewan needs that energy as much as Alberta does. But welcome to social media and modern campaigning. You've got to wear your words, and those were pretty blunt. It wasn't something that was taken out of context. She's pretty clear.
Well, go ahead.
Mealy also said it might be time to start having a discussion about how far back people have to go in candidates' social media posts. We've all said stuff that's been stupid.
Speak for yourself.
Are we going to get to the point now where anybody that's written something stupid on social media is going to be ruled out as a political candidate?
Well, so Melee says, is that my son that way? Melee?
Mealy.
Melee. He says, it's 2 years ago, where are we going to draw the line? Well, it tends to be we draw the line very far when it's our side. And we draw, very close when it's our side. Like, if you haven't said it in the last 6 months, it doesn't matter. But when it's your opponent, if they said it in preschool, god damn it, they are terrible and they are unfit for office. So the problem is we're inconsistent about this. People are willing to attack when it's not your team, and when it's your team, well, if it was more than 6 months ago, it's old history. Like the oil sands and the oil industry, it's big in Saskatchewan, but it doesn't loom as large as in Alberta. In Alberta, I mean, it is everything. If it's in the crapper, the whole province is in the crapper. Saskatchewan is less reliant on this portion of their economy. So I think, among people in Saskatchewan, I guess a big part of their identity for many of them, but for many of them, it's less so a part of like the mythology of Saskatchewan than it is in Alberta, where we've been in the oil business a lot longer, largely because we had policies that actually encouraged it longer than Saskatchewan, whereas Saskatchewan only started in the last few decades with policies that allow it to be exploited. If she was right that the oil sands were effing awful or effing whatever it is she said, then there wouldn't be anything actually wrong with it. The thing is it's just not true. It's her opinion. But like the Alberta NDP, like this stuff is just below the surface. They try to keep a lid on it, and there's a real double standard here. So she says this, and yes, it's controversial. It's gets a little bit of hot water in the media. But when the NDP calls the industry of her home province awful, it's seen as just a controversy. But if someone on the right says something just mildly, ever so mildly, even construed as homophobic or racist, most of the time of which these comments aren't, sometimes they are, but most of the time they're not really, but it can be construed as, well, then, like, this person is a Nazi, they need to be put away in a deep, dark cellar and never seen of again. So there is a real double standard in how we handle this stuff. People mess up. I don't think she messed up in this case. I think this is something she intended to say. I don't think it can be misconstrued any other way. It's pretty clear. But there is a bit of a double standard about how this stuff is reacted to. Even on bigotry and whatnot, when New Democrats or liberal or Greens talk about boycotting Israel with pretty overtly anti-Semitic language, they get a pass as not racist or not anti-Semitic because they're on the left. But if you get any kook on the right with some of the more right-leaning tropes of anti-Semitism, well, then that's unforgivable. So there is really a double standard in how we deal with this stuff here. And I'm not saying there's any way to change it. It's just what it is. Well, let's move on to other even crazier New Democrats. Let's move on to an even crazier version of the NDP in Saskatchewan. In British Columbia. Dave, why don't you give us the lowdown on the latest polls in BC and what the landscape's looking like as we get closer to Election Day?
Derek, I just got back from 5 weeks in British Columbia, and I can tell you without a doubt, nobody cares. Nobody cares. When I was driving back to Calgary on Saturday, did not see one single election sign. Nobody's talking about it the whole way. Not one single election sign. Nobody's talking about it. Angus Reid poll out today even said that the majority of majority of British Columbians, didn't want the election, and they're not following the election. At the moment, the BC NDP, the governing party, is holding an 18-point lead over the Liberals. The NDP is at 49%, the Liberals at 31%. And one thing that is going big in BC is mail-in ballots. Numbers released today said they've got over 500,000 applications for mail-in ballots, obviously because nobody wants to go stand in line in these COVID times. So to me, that's going to be the most interesting thing about the election, is how they handle all these mail-in ballots, because they can't even start counting them until all the other ballots are done.
Well, I think one reason there's or so few lawn signs is no one's got them because it's a snap election. John Horgan broke the election law to call this thing a year early, and broke his agreement with the Green Party, which had backed him in a more or less coalition government. So, except for incumbents, no one's actually gotten these signs. And people haven't got the campaign teams together. And this kind of thing really tends to advantage incumbents. Snap elections really advantage incumbent governments and incumbent MLAs. So, I think that's one reason that it's going to be. It's so boring. No one's even got their platforms ready. They've had to scramble to get their platforms in. We'll talk about that in a bit. Cory, do you think there's any chance that there could be anything other than a big NDP government in BC right now?
Only if I think a massive scandal somehow broke. It would have to be huge. It would have to devastate the whole party. We're not talking about an individual NDP candidate or something getting in trouble, or even the leader. It would have to be something that tears that party down. Polls, well, we've seen they can shift. In Alberta, there was a couple of times we thought there was going to be a Wildrose government, and that never happened. But in this case, as you said, and there's just not a lot of activity that's shifting it. Those up-and-coming parties, the BC Liberal Party, they can't campaign traditionally. That's a real handicap, too. Not just the snap election thing, but the COVID. You can't hold a big rally and get a bunch of excited volunteers together and have some beer and cheer and have some speeches and get everybody galvanized, get those donors. Door knocking, not everybody's welcoming somebody walking up to their door, going door to door to door to door. I'm sure they're doing it to a degree how they can, but it's, again, very handicapped. So as you said, this all really serves the incumbent party. The Beast, they've got the recognition, they've got the resources. It's gonna, by all appearances, looks like it's gonna be a blowout. And the spoiler in the last one were the Green Party, but they just don't seem to have that traction. Weaver's gone. We're probably going to see a big majority.
Well, there has been at least one interesting policy out of BC. The BC Liberals promising to do away with the ICBC monopoly. I think that's, what does it stand for? The insurance company of British Columbia, something like that. I was astounded to learn that it is illegal, on pain of the law, to buy private auto insurance or basic auto insurance in BC. I thought we were crazy in Alberta. I thought that I don't even know what I don't know where they have this elsewhere. I know in Manitoba they do have government auto insurance, but I wasn't aware that it was mandatory. That and if you don't comply with most laws, you get a fine, and if you don't pay your fines, you go to jail. So theoretically, if you buy private auto insurance in BC and you refuse to comply, you'll get a fine. You refuse to comply with the fine, you go to jail. You could theoretically go to jail for buying private auto insurance in BC. Holy shit, that is a crazy thing. Dave, You spent a lot of time in BC. You got parents there. You were just out in Lotus Land. Why don't you tell us what the hell? Maybe give us a background on ICBC and some of the controversies that have been going on there, and what the BC Liberal policy proposal's been.
It's known as Icky Bicky out in BC, and it is universally hated. Funny thing is, it's got a monopoly, but it loses $1 billion a year.
Only government could do that with a monopoly.
No, you know, I just don't understand it. So last week, Andrew Wilkinson, this week I guess, I'm losing track of all time. Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson proposed that if a Liberal government is elected, he would open up the market and let private companies come in, which is it's a huge issue in BC. The amount of money that people pay for car insurance in BC is much, much lower than Alberta. There's even stories of people, coming from BC into Alberta to insure their vehicles just because it's so much cheaper. And he promised to bring in cheaper rates for younger drivers, which is another huge issue out there. If you're 18, 19-year-old kid, you could be ending up paying $8,000-9,000 a year for insurance. So it is a real detriment to getting young drivers out there. So it is a hot button issue. Whether it will help them in the polls remains to be seen.
Cory, you I think have even a bit of experience with the ICBC indirectly. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, my daughter is out there going to university, and she's been out there for some time. She's insured, but she has to keep her Alberta residency. She loves BC. She might move there.
So she insures in Alberta.
Yeah, she insures in Alberta because it would like double or triple, I believe, if she tried to insure in BC, which was stressful for her. Some of the shaming of Alberta plates out in Vancouver and Vancouver Island, where she's at, made her very self-conscious for a while driving because cars were getting keyed in a number of things. But she has a household here and family and history, so she can at least escape the reach and clutches of the ICBC system, but it doesn't allow her to fully reside within British Columbia either. So, and I'm certain there's a number of other stories like that.
So this is actually a pretty reasonable. I don't know why they have a government insurance to begin with. They should just sell the damn thing. But I mean, give credit where it's due for a relative change from where things are now. A monopoly, no monopoly is better than a monopoly. No government ownership would be better than just breaking the monopoly. But it's a big step in the right direction. And maybe this, maybe we should just spend a minute talking about the BC Liberals, because they're such a weird party in Canada. They've been described as a liberal conservative coalition. I don't think that's necessary, because federal conservatives would support them provincially. I'm not sure that's fair necessarily. BC has always been the NDP on one side, and then the anybody but coalition, and that's been called the Social Credit Party before. It was once the Conservatives. It was then with Bennett, and then you had the Social Credit. And then it became the Liberal Party. And under Gordon Campbell, he was actually one of the most conservative premiers in the country early on. He became I would say, a moderate business liberal by the end of his premiership. Carbon taxes, HST, stuff like that. But it's a funny party. Christy Clark was sometimes welcomed into conservative circles. I never thought she was conservative. She was just not a hardline socialist. Federal Liberals in BC actually kind of break down between both. A lot of federal Liberals do support the NDP on the provincial level. Like in Alberta, the overwhelming majority of federal Liberals in Alberta support the NDP on a provincial level because they just know that that's the left-wing option. And there seems to be such an opening for an actual party of the right in BC right now. The BC Liberal leader is a federal Liberal. He comes from the federal Liberals. He's not a Trudeau, socialist Liberal, but he's still a pretty liberal. But I guess just next to the BC NDP, which is a pretty radical party, the BC Liberals are able to appear as a reasonable and moderate, even semi-conservative party.
They're putting forward platform proposals that just make sense. Like the ICBC one, you can see it will save you X amount of dollars. The plan to eliminate the GST for a year, you can see it will save each family X number of hundreds of dollars. So they're not just proposing pie in the sky stuff. They're proposing what seem to be common sense ideas.
Well, it's strategically smart because, I mean, one solid part of the NDP base, of course, is youth vote. They get a lot of young supporters, but even a young, starry-eyed socialist who's just graduated high school, if they're getting hit with those $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 insurance rates, that's the sort of thing that can make them turn their eyes to a different party. So it's an interesting wedge approach and an issue to grab because it forces the NDP to try and defend the ICBC, which, again, in BC, with such a hated corporation, it puts them in an awkward spot. So it's got a wide spread in that election, but strategically the Liberals actually are taking a good approach here.
Well, ICBC too has been plagued by waste and mismanagement over the last few years. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation, my old home, has been waging a holy war on the ICBC out there. Chris Sims, maybe she's someone we should get on, BC director of the CTF, to talk about this. They have been, burning through money, billion-dollar annual deficits like they're a government in their own right. Wild wasting of money on very controversial, frivolous items. They have really become a whipping boy there. I don't know. You've spent more time there than me. I've lived in BC before, quite some time ago, but I don't know. Do British Columbians like the ICBC as an institution, but just kind of hate what it's doing, or do they hate it overall, or is it kind of like Canadian healthcare, where Canadians are dominantly worshipping the system, but might get angry about how things happen within it?
I think it's, as you said, it's just been very badly run over the years. And if you're a young driver in British Columbia and you can see a kid in Alberta getting an insurance rate that's $8,000, $9,000 less, that's going to make you angry. So I think there's a general hatred for ICBC in the province, and I think it's just, the longer it's been there, the more the anger grows. And when they see them losing billions of dollars, there's something's got to change, you would think.
Well, everybody in BC listening, trust me, private insurance kicks ass. Everybody in Ontario listening, trust me, buying liquor from people other than the government also kicks ass. And any final thoughts?
No, that pretty much covered a lot today.
No, nothing from Cory. I've never heard that before.
I'm saving some for later.
All right, well, do we know the dates of the Saskatchewan BC elections on hand here?
Yes. BC is October 24th and Saskatchewan October 26th.
Okay, so we're going to be doing live broadcasts on the 24th and the 26th for the BC and Saskatchewan elections, respectively. And very soon after that, the United States general election, presidential, and everything else down the ticket. We're going to be doing live broadcasts of those. Our production quality has already markedly improved since our very first broadcast, which was the marathon, never-ending Tory leadership race results. I think we're already doing a lot better. I think we're going to have a better broadcast, but we're doing the best we can. So make sure to tune in. We're going to send out notifications. Even if you're not a member, you can sign up for our newsletter on the Western Standard website. We'll send you a notification when we're going live with our broadcast. It's free to watch. But again, if you're a member of the Western Standard, we want to thank you for your support. If you're not a member of the Western Standard already, remember a monthly membership for the Western Standard is less than you're already paying in taxes to support mainstream media outlets dominantly owned by the Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal triangle that are bought and paid for by the government. Western Standard doesn't take a penny from the government. We're one of the very few genuinely independent free press organizations in Canada, and we've had just tremendous success with your help and our great team, wrapping out September with over 600,000 readers. So we're tremendously grateful to you for giving us your time, which is building our numbers, and those of you who are members, we thank you for your support. So Dave, thanks for everything. Cory, informative and entertaining as always. And thank you all for watching. Thanks a lot. God bless the West.